Hello, dear ladies and gentlemen. It's a TV marathon on against the occupation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. In 2014, de facto, the occupation of the Ukrainian Crimea has started by the Russian Federation. And today we're going to be discussing on why this very day is an important day for us, for remembering these events and to resist the occupation, and what are the strategies for Ukraine to the deoccupation of Crimea and returning the peninsula into Ukrainian territory, to the integration of the peninsula into cultural and law field. What is done on the international arena? How can we simplify the life of our population there? How to provide the access to education and governmental services to the people on the territory of Crimea? And we have to discuss it now, in the year when we have understood that because of the pandemic, our population in the peninsula is blocked and vulnerable, and all of the occupation consequences are as well seen. So that is why we're having this marathon today. It's been organized by the Office of the President of Ukraine, the representative of the President in the Crimea Republic, and the Ministry of the Deoccupation of the Temporarily Occupied Regions of Ukraine, and the Ministry of Informational Policy, and the Dom TV channel that is being broadcasting this discussion as well. We're really grateful to the Chornomorsk TV and radio company, the Hromadske Telebachenie, Radio NV, and all of the media broadcasts that are sharing this event with us today. My name is Natalia Humanyuk. We're going to start the discussion, and the TV marathon is going to be started with the intro of the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, on the Resistance Day on Occupation. Dear citizens, it has been 7 years ago, on the 26th of February 2014, in Ukrainian Sevastopol, there was the most numerous meeting that has happened to the support of the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Thousands of Crimean people have participated in this rally to commemorate their civil position and their courage. The 26th of February has been announced a day of resisting the occupation of Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. We will never forget the events that took place 7 years ago. Crimea was the heart of Ukraine, sunny, kind-hearted. 7 years ago, our heart has been torn out of our chest. We will never forget who has done it, and we will never forget who has made this possible. Some people have said that they have torn our heart away in polite and lawful way, but now holding it in their hands, they're being really surprised why Ukraine is offended, why Ukraine does not want to build good relationship, why there is so much hatred, why Ukraine cannot forget and forgive. What is needed for Ukraine to be once again smiling happily and sincerely? That's clear. You just have to get back its heart back, get back Crimea to Ukraine. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened yet, but our memories will never be annexed. Remembering that Crimea is still occupied, the memory that the guarantees of safety and international law has been used to clean your shoes. We will never forget that there is an active militarization of region has been held, and in Crimea there has been the regular violations of the rights of Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars. The freedom of word is being prosecuted, the freedom of thoughts and religion is being prosecuted. The civil activists and journalists have been held captives, and currently the Russian Federation holds more than 100 of political captives in Crimea. Right now we're making the real steps in order to find the best solutions to all of those issues, and together with the international partners of Ukraine, before the Day of Independence of Ukraine in Kiev, we're going to have the first assembly of the Crimean Platform. That is an international platform that has been initiated by Ukraine in order to find and implement the numbers of measures to deoccupy the peninsula and to protect the rights of the Crimean people. Today, I have signed a decree on the separate measures for the deoccupation and reintegration peninsula of Crimea. For example, the government has been provided with launching and organizing the Crimean platform, and as well we have launched the measures to support Crimean Tatar language, culture, and the protection of the rights of the people who currently reside in the annexed Crimea. I do sincerely believe that there will be a day when I will be able to decline my own decree just because it will not be relevant no more, and Crimea will be the part of Ukraine again. We will preserve the memory of all of the people who had the courage on the 26th of February 2014 decide that Crimea is Ukraine. And we're going to do everything in our efforts so this statement would never be doubted by anyone. So, dear Crimea, Ukraine is waiting for you. Welcome, they usually say to the guests. And we usually say to our relatives, we're really eager to see you home. Dear Crimean people, it's high time for you to come back home. We are waiting for you, we believe in you, we love you, the people of Ukraine. On the 26th of February, why it happened and who's going to be responsive for that? I would like to remind you, 7 years ago, on the 26th of February, in front of the Parliament of Crimea, there were two meetings that had been held. The meeting by the Majlis of Crimean Tatar people and the Party of the Russian Unity. I'm going to be discussing more of what has been going on there, but because of the pro-Ukrainian position of the participants of the meetings, it happened that at this moment that the Parliament of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea would not have the resolution that would be the formal cause to final violations of the integrity of Ukraine. On the 27th of February, the army of the Russian Federation has come into the building of the Parliament of the Crimean Autonomous Republic, and the prosecution of the people of the meeting have started. We're now today speaking with Daria Sviridova, the deputy head of the constant representative of President of Ukraine in Crimea, Rafat Chubarov, the head of Majlis of Crimean Tatar people of Ukraine, Igor Ponochevny, the head of the prosecutor's office of Autonomous Republic of Crimea and city of Sevastopol, Ivan Lishina, the deputy minister of justice of Ukraine, who also protects the interests and represents the state in, for example, international institutions as European Court of Human Rights, and Anton Drubovich, who is the head of Ukrainian Institute of National Memory. There are some certain issues, there are some certain questions of why this day is important for us, what are the results of the investigation of the events of the 26th of February, because for the participations in the meeting, the first prosecution in Crimea has started, whether the international and national investigation will help us to know the truth about this day, why this day is important for us, why it is important for us to commemorate the resistance of the occupation. And we know that the two people have been killed because of the prosecution that has happened there. So the prosecution from the side of the Russian Federation has started to the participants of the pro-Ukrainian meetings and the Crimean Tatars. But let us start with the first question to Rafat Chubarov. So you have signed an application for these meetings. Can you remind us, please, why? What was happening there? We know how many manipulation there was around this event and in the courts when the prosecution has been held, how the meeting has been later on presented in the media. Before the 26th of February, on 5th of February, we have already knew that there's going to be an extraordinary assembly of the Parliament of Crimea, Autonomous Republic of Crimea, and the members of parliament, or at least the members of parliament of Crimea, are going to be approving the address to the President of Russia, Mr. Putin. And we know that there was actually the invitation for the representatives of Russian Federation to mitigate with Ukrainian internal affairs. And we have met Mr. Konstantinov and his deputies. I have been with my deputies as a head of the Majlis of Crimean Tatar people. We've tried to persuade Mr. Konstantinov that we should postpone this session in a couple of days, that we have to go with this members of parliament group headed by him to Kiev. We have to meet the temporarily acting president, Mr. Turchinov, by that time, and we have to find the common grounds for the issues about the government, so on and so forth. So all of the process has to be done in the constitutional field of Ukraine. But Mr. Konstantinov, he was not answering for his own action by that time in Crimea. By that time, we already had the agents of the intelligence of Russian Federation. That's why in the evening, and I would like to draw your attention to that, we shouldn't be ashamed of that. In the evening of the 25th of February and on the 26th of February straight away, there was no movement of any kind of political parties. Ukrainian political parties have not been noticed. It seems like everyone has kind of dissolved there, except for these activists, Ukrainians, activists of Ukrainian movement. So that is why for us, for the Majlis of Crimean Tatar people, we had to have this decision in place to combine, unite all of the people in Crimea against those plans that have been planned for the 26th of February. And on 26th of February, around 15,000 people, mostly Crimean Tatar, but also Ukrainians, the people of other ethnicities, the civil society, on this day, they have completed their task. The civil society of Crimea on this day have stated the importance of the territorial integrity of Ukraine. It didn't give the opportunity for this extraordinary assembly to happen, and so this address would be sent to Moscow. And the civil society was sure that in the evening of the 26th February, that Ukrainian state affairs and Ukrainian state institutions are going to participate in the further on development of the events. But it happened quite differently in reality. And the civil society was the only force to be stating the territorial integrity of Ukraine on that day. But those people who had to protect the integrity of Ukraine and their mandate, they didn't manage to comply with their task. If we will ask today who is to blame of that, then I believe that this question is a very important one. But I do not see that as the main question as that. Because answering the question who's to blame should not be answered but only in the January or February 2014. We have to recollect everything what has been happening in Crimea since the moment that Ukrainian independence had been proclaimed in 1991, on whether the political Kiev has not been fulfilling their tasks in that part of Ukrainian state than Crimea, how disbalanced was the protection of interests for the Ukrainian community has been there. 500,000 ethnic Ukrainians in Crimea, that we violated the interests and the rights of the Crimean Tatar people that have returned to Crimea, and whether we have provided the opportunity for the monopoly of the ethnic Russian majority. So why do I say that right now? This issue is very important for us to learn. And Crimea, and we know that the sovereignty of Ukraine will be restored upon Crimea. But in order for us to develop Crimea concerning these mistakes, we have to speak about it. But the main task for us is how can we restore the sovereignty of Crimea, how we can restore Ukrainians, Crimean Tatars, the people of other nationalities in Crimea. They're waiting to become the part of Ukrainian family once again. And I do believe that this is the most important thing that we should care about right now. Yes, right you are. You've said about this 15,000 people that have been to this meeting, and in the informational field, just 7 years later, there's a lot of mentions that the civil society in Crimea has done nothing specific. Those things have been taken down out of our memory. But there has been a lot of escalations. We have seen the military reactions. We have seen the videos of how the Russian military has been working there. But right now, if we speak and if we're thinking to you as the first deputy of the constant representatives of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, you have as well said that emphasizing the 26th of February, investigation of those cases can set out some basis or the concept of the transitional transitional law, transitional justice. So can it play a significant role in then understanding what can we do in the occupation? What do you mean by that? Well, right now, for the team of the representatives and for the other institutions in Ukraine and for the experts community, there is a long-term strategical goal of the occupation to overcome the consequences of occupation of everything that has happened because of the aggression of the Russian Federation. So building this position from war to peace is the main task that is called the transitional justice. And basically this path of transitional justice from war to peace is the way to justice, first of all. And for me personally and for our team of the representatives of the president in the Crimean Republic, the work of every day, the occupation of Crimea, is the issue of restoring the justice for every specific person and to the country overall and the international law altogether. So when we're speaking of those events, on the consequences of the events of the 26th of February, in the context of the transitional justice, we have to emphasize two most important elements. First of all, the right to know the truth on the events of those days and to keep on remembering the events that took place there. The 26th of February, as Rifat has already said, that is a very important event for each and every citizen of Ukraine from Crimea. It is a tragic and heroic event in the same time for the modern history of Ukraine. But what we believe, and what is very important for us, that this event today on the state level by the decree of the president has been acknowledged as an important event for all of our country. And that is very important in the context of the right to memory of those events. And what is very important for us right now is to continue commemorating people on those who's continuing resisting the occupation of Crimea now. And we're speaking of thousands of people and hundreds of people who are currently being held in prison. Now, remember, more than 100 political prisoners who are currently being held by Russian Federation. Otherwise, the people who have been living in this huge 2 million occupied Crimean presence because of the violations of the occupational government. Yes, we have to remember everyone's name. Server Mustafayev, who has been the prisoner of Crimea, Metropolitan Clement, who is the head of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine in Crimea. All of those people in Crimea that are currently resisting the occupation of Crimea, and we have to remember that. We have to keep that in mind in our path to justice. And another important element is fighting fighting injustice. You have said that, and in the framework of this meeting, 2 people were killed, many people have been injured, and as the consequences of this meeting, the occupational government of Russian Federation, they have started the politically motivated prosecution of our citizens. A lot of people have been persecuted among the political motives in the so-called case of the 26th of February. 3 people have been incarcerated, and overall the investigations of those cases and providing the responsibility for the people to blame on those crimes, that is important tasks for our base to justice. Yes, thank you very much, and I would like to switch to Ihor Ponochevny, the head of the prosecutor's office of Crimea and Sevastopol, for us to explain it. There are some very specific tasks. We had an international expert group on international legislators and lawyers who have analyzed hundreds of videos. More than 1,000 of photos have identified that there was no violent actions in these meetings. But the 15,000 protesters have that around 500 law enforcement. They didn't stop the provocators, and yes, we had the people killed in that, and sometimes we do not even know the names of these people. We cannot commemorate them properly. But what can be done with that? What's going on with the investigation? Yes, we can speak that. We can say that have no right. The Russian Federation has had to prosecute people who should not have been prosecuted by that time. What do we have as the result? Do we have any people prosecuted for that? What is going on with the investigation? What should we do about that? Because yes, we had a separate recommendation. There are separate recommendations for the Russian Federation, and we can speak about what's going on in Ukraine for providing the effective investigation for the fact of death and the effective actions and inaction of the executive bodies. If we're speaking about the case of the 26th of February, then the Russian case that has been started in June 2014, that was basically this first case that has shown that the international humanities law and rights for the Russian Federation is nothing for them. Because if we will speak chronologically of how the events took place, well, the first, when the occupational governments have been created and have been created on the territory of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, when we have started the case because of the death of two people that have died, have been killed in the meetings of 26th of February, that has been stopped because the people who have been connected to death have not been identified. But following the request from Moscow, when it has been shown in the investigation that Moscow has given that Ms. Poklonska has given the command to hold Artem Chihos, the deputy head of Majlis of Crimean Tatar people, as one of the organizers of the mass violent actions. And after that, Ms. Poklonska has stopped the prosecution. The case has been delegated to a new prosecutor who has been at that moment delivered from the Russian Federation. The prosecutors committee, they have already started the case on organizing the mass violent actions. And basically the next day we had the first people who have been hauled up because of the current claims. He has been held up using violence, physical violence, and after that Artem Chihos has spent around 950 days under custody. The case has been investigated by a number of prosecutors. The prosecutors were mostly representatives from the Russian Federation. The heads of the prosecuting department have been from Russia as well. So the case has been later on delivered to the occupational court of Crimea that has been created after the occupation of Crimea took place. But understanding those misfeats that has been done throughout the investigation, the case has been returned to the prosecutor, and after there has been additional prosecution provided, then the deputy of Mr. Poklonska has delivered this case to court, and the case has been proceeded by the Supreme Court of the Crimean Republic, as the occupants call it, by the September 2018, and has provided and has ended up with a resolution to imprison Artem Chihos for 8 years. Why this case was important case in violating the international humanitarian laws? Because basically, as we have seen in the most recent cases of the Court of Human Rights, we can see that on the 27th February of 2014, the Russian Federation has gained the effective control over the Crimean Republic. The actions took place on the 26th February, but the Russian Federation has prosecuted Mr. Chihos for the actions that took place before the effective control has been established. So they've been violating the Geneva Convention, and because he has been prosecuted for the actions that had took place before the effective control has been established. So they use the criminal legislation of Russian Federation retrospectively, and this is not the legislation that should have been used at the territory of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, because the international humanitarian rights regulates those rules of how the occupying country should behave in the occupational territories using their criminal legislation. It is not allowed to do that. There were more other violations, the violation of the right to protection and other institutional violations, because the persecution has taken place in the court that didn't have the right to be working in the occupied territories, so on and so forth. So in this criminal provision, we have identified 29 people who have been connected to the prosecution overall. Those are the judges, those are the prosecutors, those are the investigators of the investigative committee. Those 7 people have already been provided to the court with the claims Unfortunately, we do not have any resolutions yet. There is some complications with Ukrainian courts and with the prosecution overall. So that is why the people who have been providing the prosecution have been identified already. Yes, I would just like to clarify in this moment, can you just explain us with some certain timeline where something can be done? We're now speaking on the 7 years of occupation. You have now said that 7 people have been identified. Yes, we know that there can be the absentees resolution, but there's the issues to Ukrainian legislation. But what is the problem if the people have been already identified? So what should we wait for? What is the most important task for us and what we face and the overall, the Crimean? This is a specific order of the pre-court prosecution, because right now the criminal processual code of Ukraine gives you the opportunity to provide this special prosecution only for the people who have been identified as the international search. So in order to provide this, provide the need for the specific procedure, we have to identify this person as searched internationally. The procedure is insufficient in Ukraine, but the biggest problem is the position of the Interpol itself, because by different motives, they do not want to provide the prosecution or the search for the people who are connected to the certain crimes in Crimea, speaking on the crimes of war, speaking on the crimes against the basics of the national safety, so speaking about the general criminal prosecution. So there is the full postponement of any kind of initiatives for the people who have conducted some crimes in Ukraine. Unofficially has been announced by Interpol. So if we do not have the opportunity to announce these people into international search, we do not have the opportunity to provide the the special pre-court investigation, and we have no opportunities to prosecute these people in absence. But we do have the new law that has been voted in the first reading in the Parliament of Ukraine for the amendments to the Criminal Code of Ukraine, and it presupposes the amendment of these mechanisms of the pre-court investigation that simplifies and facilitates these bureaucratic procedures. And we do hope that when this mechanism is going to be unblocked, that these cases will be provided to the court on a faster pace, and we do hope that the court proceedings will be taken faster place as well. Thank you. I would like to address the Ivan Lishina, the Deputy of Ministry of Justice of Ukraine, and we understand that part of your competences and is to work on protecting Ukrainian interests in the European Court of Human Rights. We also understand that this is the competence of Ukrainian Parliament, not the Ministry of Justice as the executive power branch. But what can you do? What can be done in order to facilitate this process? What will be the role of the Ministry of Justice in that? And I would like to ask you to tell us more about what is being done in the international division on the cases of the 26th of February and the other cases. So, on the prosecution, then yes, this is the competence of the Parliament and the Prosecutor's Office. And the Ministry of Justice has not been included into the prosecution procedures. Now, I would like to say what can be changed in the legislation. What do you need, maybe? Well, speaking on what are the processes that take place, in Crimea on the international level, this is partly the issue of the first issue of the Ministry for the External Affairs. But speaking on the Ministry of Justice, then we have a very clear part where we are working on. This is the European Court of Human Rights that we are working with. And in my opinion, that is a very important case for us, that that basically the 26th of February has been identified as the Resistance Day, and when in 2016 I has been appointed to this position, there has been a very serious discussion held on what is the date that is going to be represented to the European Court as the date when the occupation has started and the effective control has started. So the thing is that in the Ukrainian legislation, the date has been outlined as the 21st. And when we have analyzed the factual events that have taken place, what we've had, that in 21st we cannot identify it as the 21st because the European Court considers the question of the effective control as the factual issue. So we can write, like we can 30 times write a certain date into the legislation, but if we will not be able to explain it and reason that, then the European Courts of Human Rights will not agree with us, because the Russian Federation can outline a different date in their legislation. They have 3 different dates when the effective control has been established. And that is why it has been an element of courage, let us put it this way. So we wanted to say, let us stay the 27th of February because we can provide the reasoning for that. Why the 27th? Because we have enough evidence that have shown that this was the very specific day when the political and military operations in Crimea have been started. It might have been planned for the 26th of February, but the meeting, the rally that has been held there has postponed it, or maybe it has been planned for the 27th for these decisions that has been brought up on the 26th. So there's a political message from Crimea, and as an answer, Russia has been providing the military operation to support the position of the Crimean people by that. But this meeting has postponed the plans, and they have managed to do that in a very obvious and the problematic way. So going with the military forces to the parliament, to getting the members of parliament they could reach for the 27th, they just got so many that they could. So it wasn't about the quorum or whatever. So they just got the people who they could find, who they could keep in captivity. So they've got those people voted, and they had this political message, but it really looked rough, because at this moment they have already started the military operation. So this political note that they have done was basically the part of the occupation process. So we cannot say that has been some certain message from the political elite of Crimea, because, it even cannot be said like that. So this is the 27th. It's basically that we have shown to the European Court, and you can already outline that in the European Court resolution as well. They've been signed up in details that we know that we did it in the right way. We've collected this information on the actions of the Russian military men, on how they have occupied the parliament, how that they've occupied all of the points of contact with Crimea, how in Kerch, how they have hold up the airport, the first checkpoints that they have stimulated, the first blocking of Ukrainian military departments. And by the way, that has been very interesting that they have blocked not the military men, that have been blocked the anti-air forces and the aviation forces. So the first thing for them was to provide the entry points to the Crimea and to make it so that Ukraine would not be able to provide basically the access to the Crimea. So to provide this military man in Feodosia, they have only been started to be blocked on the 3rd of March. So for a couple of days they didn't mention them. What I wanted to mention by that is that had been a very specific operation, a very specific military operation that has been implemented on the 27th. That is very important. And right now we understand that back then in 2016 we have been right to do. Well, okay, just let us clarify. You say that we were the right thing to do and we managed to prove that. What does this resolution mean in practice? People would like to know about that. Because, well, if you are just only following something, and I know that it's very important for the people, I know how much it hurts the people who currently live in Crimea, is that it's basically It is very important that this decision of court will be. This was decision that has been taken place according to the procedure that has been established with the participation of all of the parties, and this is the fact that even Russia cannot deny, because there is the decision that has already taken in place. So there are two elements to this decision. There is one moment that has now been mentioned. So identifying the date of the occupation of the 27th of February, this is basically the international language of international humanitarian laws. In European Convention, there is no term as occupation mentioned. There is a term of effective control. But in this specific case, it will be just the same. So effective control with the help of the military power is the occupation. So the date has been established, and the date is very important because basically it takes down all of the any kind of arguments by the Russian Federation that the referendum took place, because it's quite obvious that the referendum has already taken place in the framework of military occupation, and it's not Ukraine that claims that, it's actually or any other supporters of Ukraine, but the European Court of Human Rights has been saying that, and the International Justice Institution is saying that they've already identified that because the referendum has been held in the framework of occupation. And the other thing is that hasn't been mentioned that frequently. I mentioned there are the 3 dates for that. In the European Court, the Russian Federation time after time has changed, had changed their witnesses, as a criminal who's changing their testimonies to avoid responsibility. The first they've said that they had the effective control from the 21st or in the 24th, when the changes to the Constitution of Russian Federation have been approved. Then, because it wasn't clear that, like, for example, on the 18th you already have the agreement in place, and this is basically the bodies of the Russian Federation, but you don't have the effective control yet. So they said yes on the 18th, but then they have actually said that it was the 16th, referring to the referendum. So that is very important that they have those different dates, because we have shown that those changes, there was just formalities. The effective control has already been held by that period of time, and you can name any certain date, and you can say that, the effective control has been established in April. But what was important as well, that the European Court of Human Rights has also considered this issue, and we have built up our application in that way, and our claim in that way, that the European Court of Human Rights should have identified what kind of legislation would be applied in Crimea after the occupation has been approved, as for example the application of the legislation of the Russian Federation has taken place. And based on that, the European Court of Human Rights should have identified whether the territorial jurisdiction for Crimea has been established in Ukraine. What's the difference? If there are some territories that are being acknowledged as the part of this country, like for example by the UN or by any other country, there is a territorial jurisdiction. It's quite obvious that the protection of the rights of these people should be held by the certain country. I will just wrap it up. Just a second. The extraterritorially happens when certain territory is being occupied by the other country and is being controlled in the framework of the military actions. The country should as well protect the human rights of this territory, but this cause, it being only established when you have the de facto control. And the European Court has established that after the referendum, after the changes to the constitution, the Russian Federation has not had the territorial control, only extraterritorial, the effective control. They didn't provide the right to have the Crimea, so European Court of Human Rights has answered the issues of whose Crimea is. Okay, so let us get back to the discussion of how should we speak about the 26th of February and the main meaning for that. And I would like to turn to Anton Drobovich, the head of the National Memory Institute. Well, with that, what are you doing about that? So I have had some feedback from the young people who have mentioned that during Maidan they have been to school, they cannot recall what was going on there, and they're not really aware of what was going on there. And they have no idea of how Crimea has been occupied. They know that Crimea is occupied, and that's it. But the topics have been mentioned that, and the thoughts have been like that. So, like, nothing actually happened. It was just happened like that. We know nothing about that, and we have the Russian legislation and the citizens of Russian Federation, they are being prohibited to have doubts on the fact of the so-called restoration of the Russian power over Crimea. So what do you plan and what do you actually do in trying to preserve the memory of the annex of Crimea? Well, first of all, the Ukrainian Institute of National Memory has been publishing the books on history of Crimea, not only the history of the occupation of Crimea. We have the book on the beginning of Russian aggression against Crimea, when all of the events have been mentioned day by day, and quite obviously that starts with Crimea. It's a very comfortable book with when we all have been placed in chronological order with the numerous illustrations. We also have the books provided, which is the books of oral history that tell us about the events in Crimea in the words of the people who have all seen that, so who have been imprisoned. And there are the books on the longer horizon. It's important not only to say speak of the occupation, but only to speak that Crimea is Ukraine, not only in the next 30 years, but to show our connection in the civilization plan for like the Balbochans fights. For example, last year we have had this exhibition of the unknown Crimea on how many interesting cultural events in Crimea have been unknown. There have been many unknown names connected to Crimea, Tatar people, also on so forth. So creating these links connected to the occupation for us not to forget occupation, because it's a very fast changing history and we have to dedicate attention to that and show the broader horizon to something that has already been done already. So what are we doing together with the representatives of the president in Crimea, with the Office of the Prosecution, with the support of the Renaissance Foundation? What are we doing in engaging the civil society organization that has been collecting data throughout all of these years? We're developing the online platform. Well, we are going to have all of the information for Crimea provided day by day for the occupation. There will be the platform in Ukrainian and in English, a virtual platform. We're going to have a couple of months, yes, when we're going to have the first launch in a couple of months with the first stories that will help all of the world to know the truth. And by the way, with our partners from the Ukrainian Truth, from Ukrainska Pravda, we have been working together with them, and they have a very good material today, and I'm going to recommend it to you today, the material that is called My Personal Hell, How Crimea Was Occupied. It's a big long read that speak of those events, and it's an important case. We have to remember that the specific story of the specific people, of the specific cases that the Russian Federation has violated. And I would like to get back to Ihor Ponachevny, for the head of the prosecutor's office for Crimea and the Sevastopol city. Can you, in this case, remind us of what was going on, basically, and you can just prove me wrong. I think like 10 people have been killed. We know about the political prisoners, but we know that the 10 people who have been killed or have been missed and now found, and we know that's the case of the person who has been one of the symbols, Rifat who has been lost and then killed. So what are we doing in these cases, or is it just the same situation as with the meetings on the 26th? Speaking of the specific stories of specific people. Speaking of specific stories, the Rishat Ametov case has been made of these two stages. The first was him being kidnapped, and the second stage was his murder already. The case of the kidnapping of Rishat Ametov, we have identified the 3 people who have kidnapped. So what's going on with them? What does the Interpol say about that? They have been informed about the prosecution. They have been announced in the national search, and there was a tryout to do the international search with them. Based on our previous experience, well, from the Interpol, they have denied our claims for the international search for the people who have conducted the crimes of war. The actions of these 2 people in the self-defense of Crimea and one military man from Russia who has kidnapped Rashad Ahmedov. They have been classified according to their all criminal cases or criminal articles. But here in this case, Interpol did not want to announce them into the overall search, connecting the occupation of Crimea, well, stating that occupation of Crimea is a bilateral conflict between Ukraine and Russia. And it was denied for us to announce these two criminals into search. Another case, there was 10 more cases that have been more complicated than that, because those crimes have been under the unclear conditions. There was very few information about that. We don't have the people who have seen these events. It's really hard to provide investigation when we do not have the access to the people who have seen that. We don't have the access to the place where the crime took place. We do not have this opportunity to conduct the instant investigative actions where the murder has took place. It's really hard for us to try and to reflect on those cases. Okay, the fact, now when we are talking about that, we know that we have facts, we have the decisions and solutions of international courts. There are the cases that have already been proved. There are a lot of things that cannot be doubted of what has happened. Like, for example, there were no violent actions from the people who have been to the meeting on the 26th. But you have mentioned it from the very beginning. What are the open claims and open issues right now? What kind of questions would you ask further on for the state, for the people who can do something? Not a rhetorical, but the real questions, the real issues. What you would like to do at the head of the Majlis of Crimean Tatar people, what is the critical importance? You know, today in the morning I have seen the infographics that has been created by the Ministry of External Affairs of Ukraine, a very interesting one, a good reflection of it. There are all steps that have been conducted by the international communities and by all of the main international platforms that have been done in these 7 years, from the side of the UN, from the side of our European and parliamentary assemblies, from the European Parliament, from the EU, from the OSCE, so basically the European Court in Human Rights, so the European Commission. None of the single resolution that has been in place that Russia has taken into action. And Russia hasn't reacted to that. Moreover, they have been blandly claiming they're not going to follow that. So Russia currently has the potential and has the courage not to participate in any single communication, anything called dialogue on Crimea. It's quite the opposite. You know, yesterday there was the proclamation of the head of the Russian delegation to the European Council, Mr. Tolstoy, that has said that Crimea is the Russian territory once and forever, and Ukraine should forget about Crimea overall. Why am I speaking about that? We can't speak of any kind of our activities connected to the protection of the human rights, to our desire to help the political prisoners with their relatives, their children. But we have to understand that, and we have to keep on talking about one thing. When I have been coming to this panel, what I wanted to say, the question is who's to blame is an important issue, but not the main issue. The main issue is for us of how to restore the sovereignty of Russian state on Crimea. And that is not a rhetorical question. Maybe for some people, Crimea is a place where they used to go to, they have been in summer, but Crimean Tatars are being held captives, are being held prisoners and hostages there. That have no other land, no other motherland. We have done many things in order to come back to our motherland, and we have just established our home there, and Russia has come to take in our home place once again. We know that everything that's happening right now in our state, we are only considering whether it helps us to restore the sovereignty and integrity of Ukraine in Crimea, and this is how we are evaluating that. I know that you will have the next panel and you're going to be talking about that. He'll be speaking on the Crimean platform and what the efforts that have to be made in order to resolve these issues. But having this opportunity right now, I would like to thank all of those people, not only those people who stood up then on the 26th, because we made the decision really late at night on the 25th. It just took us a couple of hours to provide the information to the people, and 15,000 people have come to protect and support their state. But then the state was not able to protect its citizens, because there was the responsibility that was here in Kiev, with all of the understanding of what has been happening after the events at Maidan. But you know, the many different, I don't know, the division of these portfolios and these cabinets and these offices in the government, there was the total treason in the state institution that should have protected the sovereignty of Ukraine. Most of the people in the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the National Security Service, they've stopped fulfilling their mandates in Crimea, or they got to the part of the enemy. So they have the representatives of the Russian intelligence going on, though the special services, and they're sitting back and they're waiting as if there's no legislation or instructions that guides them. So I believe that this is the main case that showed that the people who made everything in their efforts to protect the state, the people who are not currently do not feel falling under the occupation, and those Crimean Tatars and people, ethnical Ukrainians and other people who just do not consider the occupation. We're not mentioning about their sufferings. We're not saying that when they're going to get back to Ukrainian states. For them, that's a very important and painful case. So it's not just an emotional claim from my side. I'm always trying to be in the situation for not to give anyone in Ukraine to speak of Crimea without saying, what should we do? We should mobilize ourselves, and we should mobilize our partners, and we should do that starting from the president of Ukraine and ending up with every single member, every single citizen of Ukraine. And I believe that maybe this sad date, the 7th year of occupation, do you understand what they mean? The children that has been born outside of Ukrainian sovereignty has gone to school this year. What's going to happen next? We have been through that in our history as Crimean Tatars. Out of the multi-million population, we have 300 people left. We've had our own state for more than 300 years. It has been destroyed by Moscow. Do we really want the Ukrainian states to be destroyed by Moscow? We do not want that, and that is why we have to speak on not who's to blame, even though it's important. We have to speak of how we can return Crimea after and restore the sovereignty of Ukraine. Yes, we have some time for the short mentions, but let us not mention what are the highest priority of what has to be done, because basically those are mostly the clear priorities and they're always repeated. But for example, Ivan and Igor and all of the other people, what is the next actions to take place? What do you want? What are the next actions? What is your first task that can be realistically made and fulfilled? What are you doing right now precisely? What stops you from doing that? What are the things that are going to help us get closer to deoccupations in issues of the international legislation on preserving the memory? You're going to get back to your offices today, tomorrow. So what you're up to now? Well, the first thing that I'm going to do when I will get back to the offices, that we're going to sign and claim to Igor on the materials for the cases that have already been opened, the cases that have already been resolved. The thing that those decisions that have been applied by the European human rights courts, they were mostly considering the previous cases, whether Russia is responsible for the violations of the human rights. We have provided that to show basically the administrative practices, the administrative violations. The materials that we have provided, the European Court of Human Rights, they agreed to that. If we will prove further on the violation, then the European Court concept of human rights will acknowledge the violation of the human rights. But the materials should be collected all the time, because if we have already had opened up the resolved the crime and the Russian Federation having this opportunity to the crime scene, they didn't manage to complete the crime investigation and they do not give the criminals to us, then it's one of the opportunities for one of the administrative practices of non-provision of the investigation of the facts of the murders and kidnappings provided on the territory of Crimea. Anton, your actions and what stops you from doing that possibly? Well, first of all, our institute has been created to, first of all, to work with the trauma of the totalitarian regimes, of Soviet totalitarian regime, and the Russian-Ukrainian war and occupation of Crimea and Donbass has given us additional tasks because, from everything that the totalitarian system has done, we should deal now with what the authoritarian Russian dictatorship is doing. So what prevents us, what stops us, so the Russian aggression stops us from doing something. Speaking on the specific task, and Dasha will confirm that, so for a week and a half we already making the introductory text on the principles and values for the introductory material for our online platform. I have this internal deadline that ends up today. But there's one thing that I wanted to emphasize here as well, that this is the issue of helping and preventing. I really would like us to recall the Second World War, the Nuremberg Tribunal, and the truth about the Second World War. The punishment for the Nazis, the occupants, has been before the huge informational campaign of truth. The Russian supporters will have the same. If we have justice but we don't have memories, then the justice is unstable. We know that Russia has attacked Ukraine when Ukraine has been weak, and right now Russia is not announcing the war to Ukraine. They've been telling how kind of victors and winners there are. We have to make everything in our efforts to make sure that everyone will know what kind of people they are. That's the military officers of Russian people of Russia. They're killing Ukrainian peoples, and there are the bad strains in Russian people as well. So there is a public place right now for us, so maybe there are some people who can help us with doing that, and the people can establish the legislation. What is important for you right now? What is important for us is to once again providing us with the order of the pre-court investigation. So in order for us to give the opportunity to prosecute the occupants in absence and the representatives of the occupational administration in Crimea, for them to be prosecuted according to the Ukrainian legislative system. But more specifically, we had this together with the Ukrainian Helsinki Union. We had another informational message to the international criminal courts on the prosecutions on the persecution of the journalists throughout the time of the occupation of Crimea. So we already started to build up the new informational campaign on the persecutions of the people who have been held in captivity in Crimea during the occupation. I do hope that we're going to have yet another message for the persecutor. Yes, very precisely. We're getting back to our offices, and we're going to be continuing our work, our daily work, and consulting for more than thousands people. We have been addressing the representatives of, what do you mean, what kind of clients? Can you give us an example? There's many issues of how to receive the Ukrainian passports. Can you get vaccinated on the territories that are controlled in Ukraine? How can I provide the medical services? Can I have the access to the online services? Those are the daily consultancy that we provide to our citizens in Crimea. And another point that is important for us, we know that the path to deoccupation is a long way, but we have to be ready for take this path right now. If this day is going to happen, and if it happens that, tomorrow everything will work out like this, that we can restore the control on the territory of Crimea, then we have to have a step-by-step plan of restoring the control. And right now our team is working on these documents as well. I would like to pass the floor to Rafat to finalize the words, but basically that might just be weird that, for the people to say what we're going to be doing. But, time after time, because of the COVID-19, I didn't have this opportunity to be working in Crimea, but I have been always asking, what do the people do there? I've asked the Crimean people because, they don't understand. They've been asking the people what's going to be done in Ukraine. So I wanted just for them to know that something is keep on working, something is keep on moving. So there are some internal things that Russia prevents us from doing. But I would like to get the final question to Rifat Chubarov. There's many people have been asking, many people who have been, who do not know what I can do. So what do you expect from the people of Ukraine? What kind of support are you waiting from the people? Everything that the civil society says, and we're really grateful to the civil society, and we're grateful to many people, but it's not enough. It's not enough for that. It's not enough only for us to fulfill the main task for us, to deoccupy Crimea. So this support for Ukrainian people, from Crimean Tatars, for all of the people who live in Crimea, it all has to be turned into the specific efforts. So there are two moments, and I would like to wrap up with that. So when we have been talking here, I've had a message from Dilara Bilayev. Her two sons have been held in prison. They have already been prosecuted by Russian Federation. They have already been done. What she has been writing, she has been she writes very strictly to me because she believes that we are not fulfilling our duties to free those people. And she writes me he's not dying, he's just dying behind, just dying like a dog. So she's redirected it to me. You can read it on her Facebook. And today I have read the claim of the European Union that has been done yesterday by the head of the diplomatic services of the European Union on behalf of all the members of the European Union. It says that the European Union is waiting for any kind of ideas for the Ukrainian part in the framework of the Crimean platform in order to help the territorial integrity of Ukrainian state. So that is why I would like to once again to ask the state and all of the people who is participating in preparing the Crimean platform to take place, to do everything in our efforts so that Ukrainian state, and we have the whole right to address that according to the international legislation, according to the human morals, we can go with the hardest propositions ever. For example, we're standing out the international banking system, taking down the SWIFT for Russia, and providing other ideas that can make Russia get back to the frameworks of the international legislation. For us, for Ukraine, we have no time left for any kind of additional diplomacy for ourselves and in relations with our international partners. So answering your questions, I would like to come up with a finalization. I can see that all of this troubles and all of these terrible things that currently Crimea goes to and the people who are living in Crimea are going through, I can see how that can be stopped when the source of this misery is going to be stopped and prevented, and that is Russian Federation. I have said nothing new for you. That's all obvious, but it all has to be implemented. We need to do a lot of things to deoccupy Crimea. And there was Rifat Chubarov, the head of the Majlis of the Crimean Tatars. We have Daria Sviridova, the first deputy of the constant representative of President of Ukraine in Crimea. We had Ihor Polnichovno, the head of the prosecutor's office of Crimea and Sevastopol, Ivan Lishina, the deputy minister of justice of Ukraine, and Anton Drobovich, the head of the National Institute for National Memory. And we will continue our marathon in 10 minutes, and we're going to be discussing of what should we fulfill Crimean platform with, what kind of tool that is, what can be done, not what to wait for, but what can be done, and what can be the effectiveness of this platform.
для всіх нас болісний день. І сьогодні, в день кримського спротиву російської окупації, я хочу подякувати усім тим, хто в лютому 2014 року вийшов захищати свою землю від окупанта і агресора. Хочу висловити слова вдячності і підтримки усім, хто не зламався за 7 років російської окупації. Українцям, кримським татарам, громадянам України різних національностей. 7 років тому, цього дня в Сімферополі, зібралися тисячі людей, котрі намагалися захистити єдність і територіальну цілісність України, для яких свобода і права людини, прагнення жити в цивілізованій країні важливіші, ніж сліпе пристосування до забаганок окупанта. Без вас наша країна не була б цілісною, наш народ не був би єдиним. Завдяки вашій волі ми тримаємося і робимо все можливе, щоб повернути Крим і Севастополь. Це не просто, ворог сильний і підступний, але Крим обов'язково повернеться додому, до України, бо за нами правда. І це бачить увесь світ. Зв'язок Криму з Україною нерозривний, бо Крим – це Україна.
Aziz vatandaşlarım, fertler olarak farklı olsak da halk olarak birmiz. Kayda olsak, neler yapsak da milletimiz bir, vatanımız bir, devletimiz birdir. 7 yıl evvel aynı şu günü bu aramızdaki kavi bağımızın teri ve sağlam olganını bar gücümüzle ve irademizle gösterdik, Ak Mescid'de nümayiş ettik. Umudumuz ve gayretimiz şudur ki bu gelecek vatanımızda en büyük bayramımızı geçirecek, bütün dünyanın birlikte büyük kıvancımızı paylaşacağız. Kırım bu elbet Ukrayna'dır.
Дорогі кримчани, цього року офіційно, на основі відповідного указу президента, Україна відзначає День спротиву окупації Автономної Республіки Крим та міста Севастополя. Спротиву, який у думках багатьох асоціюється з найбільшим мітингом на підтримку суверенітету та територіальної цілісності України біля будівлі Верховної Ради Автономної Республіки Крим у Сімферополі 26 лютого 2014 року. Спротиву, який мав місце тоді і який триває сьогодні. У 2020 році робота команди представництва президента України в Автономній Республіці Крим велася по різних напрямках. Від надання щоденних консультацій онлайн для громадян України, які проживають на тимчасово окупованій території, до участі у міжнародних заходах з деокупації. Ми щодня тримаємо Крим на порядку денному державних органів України, а підтримка зв'язків з громадянами, які проживають на тимчасово окупованій території Автономної Республіки Крим та міста Севастополя, є безумовним пріоритетом політики держави. Дорогі кримчани, 26 лютого ми на офіційному рівні відзначаємо День спротиву окупації Автономної Республіки Крим та міста Севастополя. Віримо, що цей спротив триває і буде тривати, а наш державний прапор обов'язково повернеться у Сімферополь, Севастополь, Ялту, Бахчисарай та інші міста нашого українського Криму. Ми зробимо все для того, щоб вам повернути свободу та повагу, і для того, щоб ви повернулися додому.
Крим – це Україна. 7 років триває юридичне протистояння. І не зникає віра у повернення українського Криму. Україна вже отримала першу перемогу в Європейському суді з прав людини щодо Криму. Велика Палата ЄСПЛ визнала прийнятними більшість вимог, викладених у позові України проти Росії. Україна в ньому стверджує про систематичні порушення Росією в Криму Європейської конвенції про права людини. Зокрема, насильницьке зникнення людей і відсутність ефективних розслідувань, жорстоке поводження, незаконні затримання. Крим – це Україна. Так було, так є і так буде завжди. Окуповані території тимчасово не підконтрольні Україні, але там продовжують жити та народжуватись українці. Лише у 2020 році по Криму та Севастополю наші відділи державної реєстрації актів цивільного стану зареєстрували майже 2000 новонароджених дітей. Тільки об'єднавши всі зусилля, ми зможемо повернути Крим. Цей день обов'язково настане.